Welcome back to another episode of Proof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I am your host. It's good to be with you here today. We're going to have a great conversation with Jon Harris about his book, Against the Waves. Before we get into that, I want to make sure you knew about an upcoming conference our church is hosting called Burn the Ships. You can go to boulderwell.org/burntheships. It's a conference we're hosting here in Boulder, Colorado, August 1st and 2nd of this year. We'd love to have you join us. We have early bird pricing going on through the beginning of May, so you're going to want to take advantage of that. Great speaker lineup with Doug Ponder, Michael Clary, Michael Foster, speaking specifically to issues men face in today's world, Christian men. So bring your friends. It's going to be a wonderful time here in Boulder. Head over there, buy tickets today. Would love to see you and have you. We're hosting it at our new church building, so you can see that. And I'll be speaking. Matt will be speaking as well. It's going to be a great time of fellowship with other guys. So make sure to head to boulderwell.org/burntheships, and we'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Proof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I'm your host. It's good to be with you here today. We're going to talk with Jon Harris about his latest book, Against the Waves. I've got my copy here in front of me. Enjoyed reading that. It covers a wide range of topics. And so, Jon, first I want to welcome you to the show. You haven't been on my program. I've been on yours, but you've never been on mine. So thanks for coming on my program today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I kind of strong-armed you into it. So if people have problems with me being on the podcast, I kind of approached you, I think. I was like, hey, when are you going to have me on? So here we are.
It's the only way to get on. It's great. I love it. So you wrote this book, Against the Waves, Christian Order in a Liberal Age. Like I said, it covers a wide range of issues. Kind of give me the rundown and for the audience, I guess. First of all, why don't you introduce yourself since you haven't been on the program before?
Yeah.
You have a great YouTube program. I remember listening to it, just frank transparency with the audience. I remember listening to you and A.D. Robles back in 2020, because you were the only ones that were really like speaking what I perceived to be clearly on issues that were going on in the church and the culture. And I was like, am I crazy? And then I found your voice and AD, and I was like so thankful because it was really clarifying and helpful for me. But kind of give people an introduction to who you are.
Yeah. Well, you might be crazy. That's always a possibility, but not for listening to us, I don't think. So I probably am best known now on this podcast as David's brother, because you had my brother on actually last week. And that's probably what prompted me to be like, hey, you got my little brother's on. I should be on this podcast. So I started doing podcasting 2019, January, talking about social justice. Then 2020 happened and kind of boosted the profile a bit. But I've written a few books on social justice. First one came out in 2020, and it was part of a lot of the research came from my master's thesis called Social Justice Goes to Church. And I didn't ever set out to be a podcaster or anything like that. But once the platform was there, I just wanted to be faithful to God and go wherever he had planned. And my track before that was I was a furniture repairman, but I was going to do like adjunct professor work and like church planning, something like that. That's what I have a seminary degree. I have a master's in history. And this kind of the social justice thing actually kind of put a kink in all of that. And so I'm actually starting to pursue the pastoral office again just now. I mean, it's been 6 years that I've been trying to combat social justice and now liberalism. And I've just kind of decided, all right, I think, there's still things I'm going to be doing on the podcast. There's still documentaries that I have coming out and books and things. But my heart has been to just help people and to minister to them in their lives and see them flourish and love God. So that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. Yeah. And I'm thankful to get to know you and hear more of your story. And I think anyone who goes to your podcast can kind of see you're really passionate for the Lord, want to help people think clearly and biblically. And so, yeah, I'm thankful for the work you do over there. You wrote this book, Against the Waves. I'm curious what inspired you to write this book. You've already written on social justice. What were you seeing out there where you're like, I need to write on this, I need to put something together, and you put it together Against the Waves?
So there are a lot of inadequate critiques of social justice. I wasn't satisfied with a lot of the critiques that honestly came late. It was long after 2020 that you started to see books pop up, maybe the end of 2021 that you started to even see Christians, conservatives start to answer some of these things. And even then it was just in, I thought, weak ways, oftentimes inadequate ways, because they would critique it from a liberal frame. And the years since then, I think there's been a lot of enthusiasm at going back to wherever it was we got off track, Different people have different ideas about what this is, but usually it's some kind of liberal frame that has led to the problems we experienced in 2020, and we need to just rid ourselves of that. So there's a desire to look under the hood and see what made us all go crazy that year, and let's get rid of that thing. And so people have gone all kinds of different directions, and including non-Christian directions, to try, some Nietzschean vitalism, or the pagan right, as they call it. There's kind of like an obsession that's been growing with race in like a very genetic, kind of almost Darwinian sense. And like, oh, it was wrong for us ever to get off that track. There's guys who think that monarchy is the way. There's guys who think that our arrangement should be, we should go to post-war. Some say post-civil war. Like, there's all these different things, and people are also blaming different things, like, oh, it's the feminism, or oh, it's the really what it is the problem is we aren't proud of who we are. Our nationality has been attacked. That's if we just got rid of all the people. Sometimes people even will go as far as to say minorities, but some will say migrants that are here illegally. That'll solve our problems. And so there's all these different solutions. And I just kind of thought, we don't have much of a positive vision. And we've been living in this default liberalism now for decades. And so I wanted to write something that questioned liberalism, and also painted a beautiful picture of what the path forward could look like in a Christian order. And I borrow, it's obviously American, so I borrow a lot from our America's past and biblical principles and verses. So that's why I wrote it. I wanted a positive vision, and I wanted to critique the guys who think they're against wokeness, but they're still trafficking in liberalism, which led to the wokeness that we experienced.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I want to actually highlight, kind of in the middle of the book, there's several chapters that I found most interesting, because those are the ones that they're the topics that I feel are the most, I guess, not contested, but confusing for people. And so the way I imagined us kind of walking through the book, rather than just doing kind of like chapter by chapters, I wanted to kind of get into it. It seems like you give a good flow where it goes: the religion of liberalism, the propositional nation, what is a nation, conservative Nazi hunters, the woke right myth, and identity politics. Now, we could spend 2 hours. I don't imagine we'll spend 2 hours. My listeners might tune out. I'm not a Joe Rogan podcast, but all these topics are very interesting to me. So I wanted to start with the religion of liberalism. I've had several guests on the podcast, some politically minded, mainly Christians, almost all Protestant Christians. And we've talked about liberalism as a concept. And so as you articulate in the book, you articulate liberalism as a religion, which is a unique approach to how we understand it. And kind of as an anecdote to the audience, what Jon does in the chapter is really, really important, I think, work, because just recently, I think this map was accurate. Right now in Germany, there's a huge split between kind of the more democratic, European Union, Western culture. And on the other side, there's the kind of the Eastern Germany, which was communistic, all that kind of stuff. And you saw the Eastern Bloc vote very highly with the ADF, which is kind of perceived to be the right wing over there.
Mm-hmm.
And you saw the Western Bloc go very like social, democratic, all that kind of stuff. And so in your chapter, you deal with this issue of communism, Marxism, and liberalism. Give kind of people a sense of what we're talking about, both with that and with the religion of liberalism.
Yeah. So I guess your question is like, what's the difference then between Marxism and liberalism? So
yeah, because when most people hear liberalism, they kind of just go like, it's liberal or conservative. I'm talking to normal Christians, you know what I mean? Like not people into politics or anything like that. They hear liberal and they think, well, I'm a conservative, so I'm against liberalism. But many conservatives are liberal in their thinking too. So kind of unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, and that there's actually some truth to that paradigm. I think a lot of guys on the right, even the ones in power, tend to have conservative instincts, but they try to justify them with liberalism, and then whatever gains liberals make, they just enshrine those as part of now. Like they give up the fight, right? Gay marriage happened. I guess we're all for gay marriage, and so I think that when people, though, so you rightly state though that when people think of that paradigm, they often put communists in the liberal category, like liberals, communists. There's obviously a lot of similarities here, and I write about that. In fact, there was a book, The Demon in Democracy, Legutko. He talks about how he grew up in communism and then in an Eastern Bloc country, and he leaves for the West. And then he finds out, wow, they have some of the same problems. And then he notices when the Iron Curtain falls that the people in Eastern Bloc countries who were in power still seem to retain their power. And it's like he thought that there would be such a backlash against them or something. And he says, no, they're adapted to this because it's very similar. They both are progressive in the sense that they don't value tradition and history. They're kind of against that. They want to get to the next rung of the human, whatever is next on the agenda for human innovation. So there's sort of this disdain, I would say, for the past. There's a totalitarian bent that they have. And this is surprising people, or does surprise people in liberalism. I think it just takes longer to get there. Communism is kind of like an instant. Right now, it's from square one. The government now holds all the power, and they call the government the people. But in liberal democracies, there's this illusion that people are making free decisions. But as things progress under this arrangement, the government grows, and then has their hands in every single aspect of someone's business. And it's appropriate we do this on the, I think, eve of April and 15th, and tax season coming up. I mean, we kind of are reminded of this every year of how actually into things the government really is. But the government's grown, even in our Western democracies that supposedly value freedom. But like it seems like the more we value freedom, the more we scream about how liberty and equality are important, the greater the government grows. It's a weird thing.
Super weird.
But he noticed this, and I don't know, he noticed a bunch of things that were parallel. They're both ideological, and they reduce everything to this one kind of principle. And for liberals, it's this expanding choice into the marketplace, regardless of whatever traditional constraints had been there. For communists, you might say the big difference is, like, for communists, they are not looking at the individual as much as they are the society as a whole as their constructing principle, and like whatever is good for everyone. But they're also still looking at it in very economic terms, and they want so their basic building block is those who are in lower economic strata, and their gripe against those who are oppressing them. And so, like, the people as a plural corporate sense ought to be liberated, whereas for liberals, it's more like the individuals ought to be liberated from these constraints. But they're both liberating people from constraints and of the past, of tradition, of religion, these kinds of things. They might use different mechanisms at times. The market is more used in liberal societies to do this. Even democracy is used to do this as mechanisms, whereas in communism, it's more of a top-down thing. But anyway, they get you to very similar places because they're both modern, and that's the point. So to just kind of like give an example of, in our country, we had Black Lives Matter kind of arise in 2015 or so, and then obviously really get going in 2020. They were Marxists. They said they were trained Marxists, right? But they grew out of a liberal framework. They only were able to do what they did because people felt very disenchanted with the promises of liberalism. Liberalism was supposed to produce all this equality. Civil rights was supposed to give them to close the gap, close the disparities. It didn't do it. And so they still want the promises of liberalism. They just don't think that the mechanism has worked for them. So they're going to become revolutionary about it. But the goals are the same in either case. Like, we're going to close all these disparities. We're going to make everyone equal, right? Liberalism is one way of approaching it, and this Marxist kind of BLM stuff is another way of approaching it. But they have a lot of similarities. And the guys who critiqued BLM because, you're not using our mechanism, did so inadequately when they would at the same time say, well, it's noble, though, the goal that they have. It's great that they want to close all these gaps. We should get rid of some of these statues. Absolutely. We should do. But hey, don't steal from my pocket. That's like the liberal defense against BLM. And I'm afraid that was probably one of the big defenses on the if you want to call it conservative side or the right, that's what you saw a lot of people doing. And so I'm just saying, like, just get rid of all of that. Get rid of the ideology. You know, your goal shouldn't be closing this gap and liberating these people in the sense that, now they have full market participation without any moral constraints. That's what liberalism gives you.
Okay, so when you describe it as a religion, I think that's very interesting. You and I both went to seminary. I've described there has been, to use an analogy, with kind of the sexual libertarians, the sexual activists, the LGBTQ whatever movement. They do kind of function as a religion. I saw BLM function as a type of religion where there were idols. So there were religious kind of revival ceremonies. You had to perform kneeling like you would in an Anglican church. You had to absolve yourself of your sins. So I can see how those movements would function as a type of religion. Maybe describe some of the mechanisms of how liberalism itself functions as a religion.
Well, it kicks God out of the public square, first of all. Even those who are devout Christians functionally become atheists once they enter the public square, because it's supposed to be this neutral area. So you start out with individual freedom is the highest good, no matter what that individual wants to do, right? They can want to go do something very evil. It's only wrong if it interferes with other people's pursuit of their own, uh, what they want to do, right? So there's no transcendent standard or moral order coming from God in this arrangement. It's really just what people want to do. And some people want to go to strip shows, some people want to go to church, right? It doesn't really matter. There's no moral tag put on that. You might say that there's still some social pressure in some areas, but functionally speaking, when we are making our political arrangements, we aren't supposed to take that into account. So I think once you start kicking God out of the equation, something has to replace it. You're going to have some kind of substitute. And for liberals, what happens is they make the self the substitute. The self gets to chart their own course. So it is humanistic on a very basic level. And then it gives way to pluralism. And it's this false notion that you can have all kinds of different religions and cultures, so multiculturalism, existing in the same society so long as they share liberal values. That becomes the only glue that sticks people together. And then we catechize people by giving them slogans from a very early age. In our homes, I would assume, Chase, you have a catechism or you have some kind of religious teaching you give your children. God is love. Teach them basic things when they're kids. Jesus loves me, this I know, right? And for liberals at a very young age, we're living in a liberal society, so we're all taught this, that diversity is our strength. You can do anything you want to do so long as it doesn't hurt others. You should do whatever you want to do with your body. That's your choice. We're a melting pot. You can be whoever you want to be. And now we've taken that to logical conclusions where it's like, well, whatever gender you want to be, I guess that's fine, right? It doesn't really matter if you import a bunch of Haitians into a small town in Ohio and overwhelm it, because those Haitians, as long as they believe in equality, want to participate in our market, they should have the right to do so. And you can now plant America anywhere in the world, because as long as you have these mechanisms for democracy and individual freedom or liberty or equality, they're framed differently. Sometimes they take terms our founders meant in a specific setting, and then they rip them out of that context and use them for their own purposes. Kind of brilliant, but you can plant democracy in the Middle East to have a little America there. And those people will just be liberals just like us, because you can be any religion, you can be any kind of person. It doesn't matter. And so as long as you subscribe to the faith, and the faith is this creed, this American creed. I think I mentioned that Mitt Romney made this famous speech in 2007 where people are saying, "Oh, you shouldn't be president. You're a Mormon, and we don't want to kind of transgress that barrier. We've never had a Mormon president." And he makes this speech, and you got Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh praising it. But basically, the speech is, we all have this American religion. He might have even used that word, but it's this American creed that we all subscribe to. That's basically our common religion. And then you can have your individual flavors. It doesn't really matter. What you're saying in that is that you got to pinch the incense to Caesar. That's what that is. So there's an emperor cult that the earlier Christians had to contend with. We have something similar going on here. And there are blasphemy laws, right? You're not allowed to say certain things. But of course, actual blasphemy must be tolerated. So, as long as, because actual blasphemy, blaspheming God, doesn't go against the liberal order. But if you notice someone's racial difference, for example, and you blaspheme them, then you are questioning the liberal order, because the liberal order shouldn't, you're not supposed to see those differences, right? So you see how this works. It's inescapable that you're going to have a God, blasphemy laws, um, certain religious creeds that you follow, and even rituals to some extent. I don't know if some people have stretched this, but they'll say like, okay, the market participation has become church. Like that is where you become, you sanctify yourself. You find your true purpose, who you really are, is in the marketplace. And that doesn't mean just dollars and cents. That means, whatever choice is available to you. It could be you want to go climb mountains, and that's kind of who you are, or it could be you want to go take drugs, illicit drugs, but you're finding your true self, and you're on this journey, and that becomes the quest of life, and so it changes your whole orientation and purpose for why you even live.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, I think, because once you kind of identify it, it's an interesting thought experiment. I think the chapter is very helpful in articulating this. But in any kind of religious framework, you're going to have sins of some sort, violations, divine violations. You're going to have ways to salvation, means to salvation, and of course, in every other religion, they're false. They're going to have means to kind of like a utopian vision, a vision for the future, kind of an eschatology, how things work out. And so I think what you're saying is that in the religion of liberalism, the kind of self actualization, the ability to become your true self, all this kind of stuff is the highest good. And that anything that would impede that is viewed as a sin. Anything that you would do would be kind of a violation of that. And this is why I think if you think of the person who kind of stayed in their hometown their whole life, didn't go to college, didn't chase their dreams, so to speak, and just kind of adopted either the career or vocation of their father, is kind of looked down upon. Like, that's so sad, or that's, they must have been held back, or if they chose to do that, it's like they're violating some like potential good they could have contributed to liberalism out there. And so they're very looked down upon. They're very like the white working class is very like yuck. The people who move to the big city to chase their dreams. This is the goal of liberalism, is self-actualization. So I think I see what you're getting at there. And I'm curious, in any religion, there's kind of an exclusive, inclusive component where you belong to the liberal order, you belong to a religion if you hold to these things. And so you're suggesting that it's mainly kind of idea based around a creed, a common creed, that we participate in the kind of American religious empire, the emperor cult, by assenting to that creed, not violating it, and not imposing on anyone else anything that would go against that. And this is why you see such backlash when people are like, "You want to impose your religion?" Is what I'm saying consistent with kind of what you're
Yeah,
articulating in the chapter?
exactly. Yeah, you understand it well, I think. So yeah,
Okay.
that's why even in Christianity, there's these fault lines I described that some people are wondering what in the world's going on. I don't understand it, because some of these guys believe in the authority of Scripture, the inerrancy, the infallibility. They believe in the Trinity, all the doctrines. You go down the line, like you guys will both subscribe to the Athanasian Creed. Like, why are you so like you seem to have like hatred for this other person? And of course, with social justice, I think this was a little easier for us because like we already were steeped in anti-Marxism, rituals and so forth. I mean, we being the last, I know you're a millennial too, being the last generation of the Cold War era, we're both kind of like, yeah, Marxism bad, and we know a little bit
Right.
about it. So BLM was like close enough that we could see that, okay, this is the Christians that are going along with this, are going along with this political religion, and it's not really Christianity anymore, it's fake. But with liberalism, it's a little harder because we were raised that way. And it does make sense, though, of some of the divides you have. And I mentioned some of them. And I know that this is kind of like, like you're not supposed to say this because some of these guys do good work on some things. But look, I went after some of the G3 guys in the book because I'm just like, they're making these firm lines as if it's like you violated orthodoxy. Like Stephen Wolfe violated orthodoxy with his book. And we got to like condemn this threat like it's a heresy. But it's not, they cannot find scripture that does it. They have to make passages that are not about what Stephen's talking about do the work for them. So, things like Ephesians 2 and the barrier, the dividing wall is broken down, and they have to make that say somehow that you shouldn't see race ever, or you shouldn't see nationality or whatever. And it's like that's not what that's about, but they're forced to go to those places because that's the only way they can sell it, I think, to a Christian audience, is by putting a Bible verse there. And they're really just slapping it on, whether they know they're doing that or not. Really, what's behind it is they have liberal instincts. They're part of a liberal order. And you have someone who's just violated that, who's not part of the liberal order, even though they both believe the same things about God and the scripture and so forth. They're on many levels, they're going to support the syncretized religion, I think, that they've been operating under. And I do need to say very clearly, I don't think this means, like, here's the thing about the liberal order. Like, it doesn't mean that everyone is fully on board with the religion in every sense. It's like wokeness, right? Like you had people that were kind of on the fringes that like maybe put a black square on their profile, but they were, they would have said, oh, no way, I'm not doing reparations, or like they weren't fully on board with everything. And it's that way with liberalism too. Like in the church, a lot of these guys who are Christians that secure the liberal order. In fact, Joel Berry, I was just talking to Joel Berry yesterday, who I like a lot of what he posts. He actually just ordered the book, by the way. So maybe he doesn't want me to put that out there, but it's out there, so it's out there. And with Joel, like I think like most of his instincts seem to be pretty conservative. And I think you're like friends with him and stuff. And like we would say like he's orthodox, like there's a lot of good things to say, but like every once in a while, and I've been clear with him about it. I'm like, I think you have these liberal instincts that come out, and that's what creates some of these divisions. So my goal is to locate these, even in my own life, because I'm not like I realize I was bored into this. So where are my liberal instincts? And then, and there's two things, right? You either reframe some of those things from a Christian order perspective, or you ditch them because they're just rotten. So I'll give you an example of something that you could reframe. We have a tradition in our society that the government doesn't get involved in religious affairs, not often, at least, unless they're a death cult killing people, or unfortunately 2020 was an exception, right? Let's arrest pastors who open their church up, but in general, we have this good tradition, right, of like, I think it's good, at least, like we suspect the government is going to be more abusive. This is part of the context of the Revolutionary War and all that. And we kind of are skeptical of state churches, right? This is a very American thing, but it's also a tradition, right? And you can see some really good things about that. It's not a firm, like, universal law that applies to all peoples in all places. It obviously doesn't apply to the Old Testament, right? There's obviously situations where our arrangement is not suited. And so part of the problem with liberalism is it's freeze framed and taken some of these things that are suitable for certain arrangements. When you have a high trust society with virtuous people, you can actually have a lot more freedom to do things. And you could actually have drugs could be totally legal and people aren't abusing them. Like, it's totally like, why have any drug laws? It doesn't make any sense. You don't need it. As soon as people start dumping virtue, you have to now re-examine things and whether or not this arrangement is still prudent. But a liberal says, no, that is an end in and of itself. This arrangement itself is an end in and of itself. So it's not about the good of society. It's about now framing it in terms of like individuals must make these choices. This allows them to do it. So you can see in that all these matters take a lot of wisdom to navigate. But I think for Christians, the bigger point should be, we live in God's world. He's got an order. We got to conform ourselves to it. And that includes our traditions. And then this order is mediated, though, through tradition and applied to our context. So when we as Americans are looking at this in 2025, we should be asking ourselves, what does God require? First of all, not what is good for human freedom, but what does God require? What are the responsibilities? And then what's possible in our situation? Some things aren't possible that are good. Some things are, but what can we do? And then it's really it's really about trying to ensure that we protect the institutions and traditions that have reinforced God's order and dump the stuff, the innovative stuff that has undermined.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's go to kind of nation. And the reason I want to talk about this, I think it's a really hot topic out there right now, and not a lot of people are willing to touch it. Well, some people are willing to touch it, but like you mentioned at the top of the episode, some people are willing to touch it in a way that's like they're just trying to edgelord on Twitter or talk about other stuff.
Oh yeah.
Um, but like Matt Walsh has talked about this. I mean, like, what is an American? He came out with a documentary, "What is a Woman?" or "Am I a Racist?" And I enjoyed those thoroughly. I thought they were well done. Um, but this question of what is an American, what is a nation, I think these are really interesting, and it kind of overlaps with the propositional nation idea, this idea that what we just talked about, where a nation is a set of ideas and anyone can kind of belong to the melting pot and kind of assimilate easily if they just like all of a sudden they're planted, they're flown from Zimbabwe to America and now they're an American, because they signed a piece of paper or said the creed. And so when you ask the question, what is a nation, kind of give the audience
Yeah.
a little bit more information, like how would you define a nation in contradiction to liberalism?
Liberals. Yeah. So that's a good question. I think, so that's an interesting thought. Like liberals, plural, like in different Western societies, I'm not sure if they would all have the same conception of a nation. I know in America, though, we have had this idea that we are a propositional nation for at least like 5 or 6 decades, and that's kind of a Cold War era relic almost. I think where we were against the Soviet Union, and what sets us apart? How are we different from them? Well, we believe in God. It was like very general things, like we believe in freedom. Um, we it was like these things that we subscribe to, and the immigrants want to come here and they can be Americans as long as they subscribe to the creed. And like I said, the creed ended up, for conservatives still, or people on the right, they might say that they believe in the creed, but the creed is freedom. For those on the left, it's equality. But it seems like equality is winning out. Equality is the creed. And so you're an American as long as you subscribe to equality somehow. You believe in this principle. And it's pretty nebulous, right? Because equality now can mean women should be in men's sports. But our parents' generation would say that's crazy, but they would say, no, equality means that we shouldn't see race or something like that. We shouldn't take that into account for public policy or anything. And maybe my grandparents would have been like, yeah, like I believe in equality, but or actually, really, it's more like I guess my great grandparents or great, like they might not have seen women voting or public schools as representative of equality, but they probably still would have been like, well, I believe in equality, like all men are equal in God's eyes, right? So
Right. Yeah.
This term has been shifted and moved and used really at the discretion of those in political power for their own purposes. And that's really what a nation is in America, and it's really sad. And so like there's this emancipation narrative we tell ourselves, that's the history of like all the people who stood against our society on some level, were prophets sent from the liberals on high to correct us because of our archaic and ancient ways that were not fit for modern times. Those people end up being the heroes, and the definition of who we are ends up being this nebulous equality, and anyone can share it. A recent immigrant can be an American. We can plant America, like I said, in the Middle East. I think for other Western countries, like France, for example, it's a little different. Like they do, I think, take a lot of pride in their unique culture and civilization. So there still are these remaining elements of like we're Frenchmen because of these things, this cuisine and this language and these other things. But I think in general, though, that's eroding all across Europe, and it's eroding as we also take in big groups of immigrants to our countries, with the exception of like Poland and I don't know what's where Viktor Orban is, Hungary.
Hungry. Yeah.
Yeah, like those are the places where you don't like they're trying to reject this. But so what is a nation? A nation's an extension of a family in actuality. The immigrants coming to Europe from Middle Eastern and African countries know this because they view themselves as part of a different nation coming into places like France and Germany.
Right.
They still retain many of those characteristics and associate with people that are like them. They're a nation within a nation now. And so it's an extension of a family with the unique things that come with that. You're shaped by a particular land, and that's going to affect your cuisine and your and well, obviously your language is probably one of the most formative things. Your dialect, um, the stories and legends that you tell each other, the literature that you digest, or if it's an oral tradition, the oral traditions. It's like, I think of it this way: it's like culture is kind of like a pond that has different streams coming into it, or a lake. And so, one of those streams could be cuisine, one of those streams could be language, one of those streams could be religion. There's all these different streams that are coming in, and it's inevitable. You're going to have these things that shape people. Um, but a nation itself is also has a lineage component or an ancestral component. There's at least a core, and we see that in the Old Testament. So I give in that chapter a lot of Bible verses because I really want to make sure it's totally biblical for people. But there is assimilation. You can come into the nation and be accepted and be counted as a citizen. There were certain restrictions and limitations on some of this. Most people, they're doing it for children down the line because, in ancient Israel, you can't own land, you can't um, participate in leadership in the society. There's all these restrictions of things you can't do that don't exist in America. But you can assimilate. There is a mechanism for this, but you can never. There's a scale at which this begins to not work anymore, and that's the thing that I think we've, because of our propositionation tendencies, have been stupid about. We've allowed large groups of people with strong in-group preferences into our heartland. Go to Dearborn, Michigan, and see if it's America still, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
we've allowed these people in, and we've said they're Americans, and we've treated them as Americans, and we've given them all the benefits that our ancestors fought hard for. And we've done it based on a very low standard. They haven't actually assimilated. And now we're to the point where we're questioning what even is an American, because I don't know, that ancestral core that ourselves and our posterity, the Constitution talks about, that might be gone. Like that might be at a range now where, like, is it 80%? Like what's even the percentage now of people that can harken back to those times? um, Understanding that again, I got to emphasize that assimilation is possible, but you get at a certain scale and you lose the nation, just like you would with a family. If a nation's a family, same thing. You import a bunch of people into your house, Chase, and they're different and they speak a different language. They have a different religion. Sooner or later, you lose the character of that household.
Yeah, I remember thinking this. Gosh, growing up, kind of under kind of the American liberal ideal of kind of multiculturalism and pluralism, especially in the church, where I was kind of raised to think like, going to the nations is the highest thing you could do in life. Being a missionary is kind of like the Navy SEALs of Christianity. And so growing up, I was very much taught like, if you hear someone speaking a foreign accent, it should be enthralling to you. It should be exciting that the nations are coming to us, and that,
Mhm.
why would you ever be suspicious of someone speaking in a foreign accent? I think 9/11 blew that narrative up for some people, because all of a sudden there was like, they could sense there was a threat. But now I just realize, like, look, when I go to a foreign country, I've been a missionary, I've traveled, and I speak in an American accent, they're suspicious of me, and I don't look at them and be like, "How dare you, you racist?" I just go like, "Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not from here." Like they have a right to kind of like have their guard up a little bit. And so, it's a subtle shift, but even in that just kind of thing, I still love. I like exploring other cultures. I like getting to know other people across cultural boundaries. I just find that fun. I like kind of that shared interest in one another's stories and that kind of thing. I do appreciate the work you did. I think it was in this chapter, and maybe the next one we'll get to, where you kind of differentiated and you go back to the Bible and talk about, hey, look, like, a lot of the concepts you've been taught to be afraid of have been reframed to like suppress really basic God-given things. Like a good example would be people and place. God gave his people a place, and he defined his people. And of course, now you'll hear kind of this great fear when people mention something like blood and soil, which I guess was a Nazi thing. I don't really study the Nazis, but like that's what they talk about. And so anytime somebody mentions ancestry or a place or shared culture, people on the left are immediately going to, like, their minds are going to like melt, because you're like in danger of becoming like a Nazi. And it's like, whoa, 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 what's going on here? I'm just like trying to define and describe, look, like, I come from a particular people in a place. I'm not trying to defend any kind of Nazism. Like, I don't know what's going on. So maybe let's go to I think that gets into conservative Nazi hunters.
Hmm.
And this was a question that came up for me and my wife. Like, we've been attacked and called all sorts of things locally, like Nazis and white supremacists, which is hilarious because it's such a joke. It's not true, but you could say that all day and it doesn't matter to them. So why does the left frame everyone to their right as a Nazi? Let's start there, and then we'll get into kind of conservative Nazi hunters.
Yeah, this is the post-war consensus stuff, which funny that, I mean, I heard about the term long before it was used on X, but now it's like it marks you if you use it, because now you're suspected of being a Nazi now by the liberals if you even use the term post-war consensus. And Reno, who more or less popularized this term, actually Scruton was the first person I heard it from, but Reno, who popularized the term and appropriated it for his book Return of the Strong Gods, is very much pro-ally. So it's like so what's going on? Like, I think what's going on is Hitler, Nazis, World War II became a convenient narrative for liberals to use to justify their position and then slander and slam their enemies. And of course, this gets into Frankfurt School stuff. I mean, Adorno's F scale, where you're a Nazi if you kind of love your country and love your parents. Like, it gets ridiculous.
Right.
You're on the scale somewhere. There's this little fascist in you. So I think because Hitler was such a despicable character in so many ways, and because he did believe, and as you rightly say, the Nazi slogan "Blood and Soil," because he did believe that Germany ought to be characterized by the people who lived there and the place in which they lived. And again, you have to realize the threats at the time. I mean, Bolshevism was the big threat. That's really what propelled Hitler into power more than anything else. Was they saw the Russian Revolution happen. They had communists in their own country, and they were afraid of the same thing happening to them. And so Hitler was kind of like a stopgap against this. And one of the things that Bolshevism or communism does is it divides people along the lines of class. And so Hitler was trying to say that we're not going to divide Germany that way. It's not going to be along the lines of class for some international social order. We are particular, and we're going to try to remain Germans, and no matter what strata you're in, right? So this has become a justification because Hitler did awful things, that anyone who believes that, they're going to end up going the same way Hitler went, right?
Okay.
And it's obviously it's unfair. It's not. It's a cartoon. I think I even argue in that chapter, or at least I reference that there were older conservative guys who were saying, "Look, Hitler talked a lot about blood and soil, but you look at his actual regime, and they didn't seem to actually respect Germany's unique and divergent folkways, that because Germany's kind of a big country. There's different kinds of people. There's a lot of Catholics, a lot of Lutherans. There's these Bavarian folks who are different than people who live in Berlin, and so Hitler didn't seem to respect these unique ways. And I think the biggest one I focused on was religion, because he's saying blood and soil, right? So it's like, hey, it's our ancestors and they live here, but what he ends up doing is like he ends up trying to subordinate the church to his social agenda, his social Darwinian agenda. So when he even talks about blood, it's not the same thing as when you and I would talk about people.
Right.
We're coming from a very Christian perspective that views people as not only image bearers of God, but they have unique characteristics that don't all flow from genetics. That genetics certainly shapes people, but there's obviously a realm of beliefs. There's a spiritual realm. There's a skill sets, and there's a lot of things that factor into making a person who they are, and making people who they are, and groups of people. And so Hitler bought into a more of a or less a genetic determinism. I mean, he says in Mein Kampf that every impulse is motivated by biological self-preservation. That's what he thinks makes the world go round. So anyways, religion then subordinates itself to genetics in this, and in his mind, and that meant that churches, I mean, there's even pictures of it. You can go back and look, churches with swastikas swapped out for crosses, and Mein Kampf is sitting there instead of the Bible. And
wow.
I mean, there was a lot of bad stuff that happened. His positive Christianity, I mean, I know there's like this attempt to sort of revive this. It's really weird to me.
Yeah.
It was not a preservation of orthodoxy. It was an attempt to sublimate the church to his own nefarious plans, in my opinion. So did he really believe in blood and soil? Did he really believe in people in place and particularity? Not so much. He kind of more or less believed in an ideology and then wanted to conform everything else to that ideology. That's really a way. And it's a reactionary ideology. It's reacting to Bolshevism or communism. You can kind of understand why people went for this. But at the same time, that doesn't reflect on, and it's kind of a stupid conversation, frankly, to have, that this reflects on Anglo-American conservatives today, or at really any point. Germany's got, there's so many differences. Germany's just a different. So someone recently asked me, like, they were like, well, you sometimes tweet about Rhodesia or whatever. It's like very rare, but yeah, like I have said some things about Rhodesia. I mean, I have a book on the Great Betrayal, and I think there's some lessons to be learned there. It's like, well, like, why can't you, you're inspired by that. Why can't you be inspired by Germany or whatever? And I'm like, so first of all, when I'm talking about Rhodesia, we're talking about cousins, Anglo Protestants living in a different area. So there's a difference there. Obviously, there's a difference, but they're much closer in proximity to who we are as Americans than anything Germany. It's a different language. It's a different religious construct. By the time Hitler was rising, I mean, Christianity was so compromised by neo-orthodoxy and higher criticism. It's a totally different scenario. And so, yeah, I mean, I think as Americans, what we should be doing, especially, is looking into our own past, familiarizing ourselves with that if we don't know it, and reaching into the things that have filtered through that past that are Christian. And we have so much; it's so rich. So, yeah. Anyway, I don't know if that really answered your question totally, but when we talk about people in place, I don't think we're necessarily meaning the same exact thing Hitler did. And I think our attempt is to conform ourselves to God's order, not some like Darwinian biological reduction stuff.
Totally. I mean, it just came up when I was preaching a couple of years ago. You just preach through the Bible and you look at how God forms people and brings people together under his covenant. And yeah, people in place just stood out. And I was like, well, that's sad that it's such obviously, adopted by terrible ideologies out there, but we have something we can be, confident in, which is God's word. We don't need to go to these other ideologies. I guess one of the things that comes up when you have these kind of conservative liberals, let's call them, is they're constantly trying to prove that they're not bad. And the way they do that is by finding people on the right that they can kind of dump on, right?
Yes.
They can like, disavow this, and, I've seen this all the time where, well, in order to prove to the liberal, this was actually kind of a so-called missional strategy. And I've told my listeners this before where, when I moved here to plant, it was just kind of baked into how you plant a church in a liberal context. You have to prove to the liberals that you're not like those dumb backwoods Southerners, and so you would find yourself kind of positioning yourself to appeal to them by dumping on people on the right. I don't do that anymore. And, to anyone that I caused, anyway, I taught that, I apologize for that because it's inappropriate, but I want to hear you kind of articulate why are so many conservatives, why is that instinct kind of like baked into their way of thinking? You see this politically, you see this socially, you see this in the church. Why are so many otherwise conservative Christians obsessed with like agreeing with the left's terms in order to kind of prove their worthiness?
Yeah, the left's frame and what they value, and trying to show them that you're not a threat because you value the same things. The whole apologetics industry, just about, it seems like, is this, because at least on social issues, the whole attempt is to say, well, Paul said those things, but he wasn't sexist. Right. Here's how he valued, or actually, usually it's to jump to, but look how Jesus valued women. Yep. And the whole slavery thing in the Old Testament, that wasn't really slavery. It wasn't real slavery. When Paul talked about Roman slavery and even, that wasn't even real slavery. I mean, it's nuts. I'm like, are you serious? Like, I don't remember any gladiatorial arenas in Alabama. Come on, like, they were literally watching slaves kill each other for sport. Don't
Right.
tell me that this system, it's like, oh, it's so much better than American slavery. It's a joke if you actually study it. It's
Right.
different, but like it's got some major like even sex slavery was accepted. Uh,
Right.
or I should say, like having sexual relationship with your slaves was something accepted in the culture. Where in America that had to be more hidden, and it was like so anyway, not to get off on a rabbit trail there, but that is the apologetics industry, and that is the Christian frame, as you rightly, I think, have stated. And it really is just living under the liberal gaze, knowing that the institutions are controlled by liberals, knowing that you won't attain any kind of platforming unless they don't see you as a threat. So you must prove yourself as someone who pinches the incense and lives in the liberal order somehow. And it makes it convenient if you have guys to your right. And let's be honest about something here for a moment, because I've noticed that guys who are very transgressive of the liberal order, but from more of like kind of a neo-Nazi-ish type vantage point, they will often think they're to the far right. But that is a liberal framing of the issue too. That is the liberals want you to think of right wing as Nazi every time. It suits their purposes. It makes it easier to vilify. And so if guys come along and say that's really what being far authentically to the right is, it suits their purposes. So I actually don't think, because like I'm to the right of those guys, right? Like at an American scale, if the scale is conservatism, like I'm to the right of those guys. But I think what it really is it's not dumping people to the right. Like I understand when people say that, I probably said that. But really what it's dumping people the liberal order sees as a threat, whether they're
Okay.
on the right or wherever they are. It's
Yeah.
just who's a threat to the liberal order. Um, it could be someone who's, like a threat because not their beliefs, but the way they live or the crimes they've done, or it could be someone because of what they believe, even though they're a great person. Like I've seen so many examples of this cutting in so many different directions. That's the common thread through all of it. Is this person a threat to the liberal order? And if they're a threat to the liberal order, to dump on them is to gain credibility in the eyes of liberals.
Right. Yeah, it goes back to the religion of liberalism thing where it's like someone needs to die. Someone you need to find somebody to pin problems on
That's right.
in order to absolve yourself of ever being either associated or anything like that. And so what makes me frustrated is that you highlight in the book, like when they call Trump Hitler or whatever, or like, he's not Hitler, but he sure seems like it, all that kind of stuff. They What they do to a younger generation is they basically say like, well, I guess if I voted Trump, I am that,
Yeah.
and you see a whole reaction. And I sympathize with that instinct, because they don't want to adopt that framework. But it does bother me because the media, they just lie. And so, when they do this kind of stuff and they use these words and they use these ideologies and they attack people on the right, and then conservatives that kind of know the play, they'll disavow. But the younger generation, they've been so saturated in this market where they're used to hearing this, they become desensitized to it, but they just don't care anymore.
Yeah.
And they kind of just like, they're young. I view it as kind of reckless, and they embrace a lot of stuff that whether or not it hurts them in the future is really not my concern as much. It's more about, they're just being reactionaries to the left, which I get. I like I like memeing, all that kind of stuff. It's fun, but it's very troubling. And so that's, it's frustrating, and it's also frustrating for normal Christians, when they're associated with other Christians, that they're like, well, that's, do you really want to be associated with him? And it's like, I don't live under that framework. I just don't, it doesn't really bother me as much. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's kind of some of the stuff that I'm seeing out there.
Yeah. Well, I've had to sort of navigate in my own life what associations I'll have, how tight they'll be, how public they'll be. Everyone has that, and there's a number of factors that go into it. I think the Bible has a lot to say about this. Um, I think it's true that you're going to make a better decision when you have more wise people around you, counselors, and so you want to surround yourself with wise people, right? The friends of fools aren't the kinds of people to associate with. And Proverbs is filled with examples of how bad company can corrupt good morals. So, so I think there is some prudence to. So here's the thing, and might be the tough thing you're trying to balance. There is prudence to stepping away from guys who are bent on just being transgressive to transgress. They don't have much of a positive standard, or maybe they think they do, but it's some reductionistic ideology. Those guys can be dangerous, because here's the thing. There's a few things, but one of the things is you are dealing with actual power with liberalism. Like, just be aware of that. Like, you are making decisions that will affect the rest of your life potentially. And you do need to navigate that wisely, just like Daniel did. And just like Esther did. And like, there's times to take risks. There's also times to be prudent and seek, to try to figure out why does God have me here? Where does he want me to go? And you may have to, keep your mouth shut on certain things, not compromise. I never think you should compromise, but there may be times to not say things that you believe that would cause offense in order to make your way into a more influential position where you can say them or something. There is strategy involved here. Unfortunately, most people that start saying what I just said end up being compromisers. And so they justify that. That's what they're doing. But yeah. I think a lot of people aren't. That's not what they're doing. They're compromising. They believe the stuff. They do believe in liberalism. So anyway, all that to say, like, yeah, I think you're right that the dynamics are working with especially younger guys who come from unstable backgrounds often and have been cut off from their own heritage because there's nothing good in it. They've been given woke garbage. And now they're looking to, well, this is the worst thing that the bad guys that hate me say there is, so it must be good. And it's right. A cartoon. They're basically the post-war consensus flip. They're still buying into it. I don't find it particularly interesting. I don't think it's very high IQ stuff, to be quite honest with you, especially for Americans to go down that path. But yeah, the second question, other than like prudence and who you associate with and how reckless they are and do they understand how power works and all that. The other thing is also, now I just lost my train of thought. I had this great profound point. What was I trying to say? Oh, yeah, right. Not letting the liberals dictate to you who you can and can't have relationships with and associations with. You don't want to give them more power than they have, or you don't want to legitimize their frame, right?
Right, yeah.
So that becomes, I think, the thing you're struggling through. And I've struggled through it too. It's like, I'm not going to legitimize their frame. At the same time, I'm going to be careful not to just jump in with Andrew Tate. Right, yeah. Andrew Tate, there really is no positive vision there. It's right. All just transgressing the liberal order, but with no anchor. And we do have an anchor. It's called Christianity. So we absolutely have to cling to our positive vision. And that should be the thing that orients us and helps us choose friends and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so we didn't even get to identity politics being inevitable. This book has a lot of great, it's very well researched. There's so much to talk about, but why don't we go ahead and share with the audience? I'll put a link in the show notes to where they can buy it, but where can people find your book and your work?
Yeah, JohnHarrisMediaNow.com. I understand is, and you can if you just want to go to the book, againstthewavesbook.com is another place. It's also on Amazon. It's on Kindle. It's on Audible. So you can listen to it there if you want. But those are the places. It probably helps me out the most if you just go to againstthewavesbook.com and get a signed copy. But I know we consume books in different ways. I confess I'm an Audible guy more than anything now. So it's just how it is.
So now. You didn't really read the book, John. You just didn't read the book. You
my
just
own book?
To it.
I
listened to books.
Recorded. I did have to read my own book because I did not have.
There you go.
I did it myself. So
I should probably do that for mine.
Yeah, do you not have it on Audible?
No. I would have to sit down and read it. And when I start reading, I start to get my mind just starts going. It's really difficult. So maybe I'll have you read my book. That would be great.
It is a commitment. So, whoever you have read it, they do have to sit there. They do have to go back and do take two. I'd mess that up. People were telling me like, oh, you should just have AI. Well, I respect that. I understand people who do it. I know why they do, but I don't know. I'm just call me old school. Um, I I have my
John.
but old school is now like using a smartphone instead of I don't know like Neuralink or something.
Well, John, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. I appreciate it, Chase.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with me and John Harris. I know I did. Lots to get into there and so much we didn't even cover. But go pick up his book. It's a wonderful resource to have on your shelf. Before we sign off for the day, I wanted to remind you about a great product that I use called Ion Layer. Ion Layer is an NAD plus patch. Now, you may be asking what that is. It's simply a supplement that your body already produces, and it helps you because your NAD plus levels decrease as you age. These patches are patented technology that's approved by a medical doctor that clears you, and it helps you boost your NAD plus levels. These are things that help you with muscle recovery after workout, fatigue, all that kind of stuff. And so you can go over to ionlayer.com, use code FPT to get $100 off your first kit. These are already a fraction of the cost of an IV treatment, but it's something I use and I enjoy, and so I wanted you to enjoy it as well. Head over to ionlayer.com, use code FPT to get $100 off your first kit. Also a reminder, we're doing a special release on the Patreon. For those who are able to sign up on the Patreon, would love your support. I'm doing a study of the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith. We're going chapter by chapter in that, breaking it down, showing how it helps us think more biblically and theologically about the things of God. So you can get access to that and early access to every episode by going to the Patreon link, signing up for $5 or $15 a month, and you can enjoy that over there. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.